Welcome back to Story Deep Dive with Dana and Rachel. We are coming in hot with our fourth episode about the woman in the library. But before we get to that, if you're new here, this is a podcast between book coaches and editors who are also besties. We talk about stories that we're reading, and we're not talking about them just as readers. We're talking about them as writers to draw inspiration from great books and lots of laughs. And y'all, you will low-key sometimes get shenanigans too. We just can't help ourselves. But we promise for every squirrel moment, we bring it right back. Right? And so, like I said before, we are closing out our discussion about The Woman in the Library by
Sulari Gentill.
Come on. Rachel's like, I'm just smiling. I'm just smiling. And she's like, Sulari Gentill.
First of all, I feel like when it came out of my mouth, I was like, I sounded like an AI insertion, right? Like where it was like you have like the voice reader on like Microsoft Word or something. And I just like had the reader say it.
Gentill.
I was, okay, let me just quick brief confession here. You were doing the introduction, and I was sitting here still just smiling because you were like, we're friends and shenanigans, and I was like sitting here like, hee, yes, that's true, and I was just like thinking about like, this is my friend, and I'm still like, it's just nothing going on in my head except, oh, my best friend, and I was like so happy, and then when you paused, I was like, oh, she's gonna try it this time, like it's the last episode, she's gonna give it a go, and then the pause lingered, and I was like, that's my cue.
She's pointing at me. Ma'am, I'm like Rachel up here looking pretty. Ma'am, wake up, it's your turn. Oh,
not just here for decoration. Come on, Rachel.
Beautiful decoration, but that's not it. That is not it. That's not how we're doing it over here.
I'm gonna take the compliment, and that's all I'm gonna retain. It's just the compliment.
Please, have at it. Oh my gosh, that was hilarious. So, y'all, this literally has my face hurting. This is our last episode, and so if you're new here again, we do 4 episodes around the books that we talk about. We have our overview, we have the plot, we have the characters, and today we have editor's takes. If you've missed any of the other episodes, go ahead, hit that, well, you can finish listening to this one, and then you could go back. You could go back. And we'll be here for you. But before we get into talking about the editor's takes for this novel, we were sort of like shooting the breeze before we get on, sort of going over our notes and talking about like how we want to kick this off. And we thought it would be a great time to sort of tease out what our next read is. So do you want me to start or do you want to start?
Well, since it's your pick, I'm going to say, why don't you just lead us in. Tell us about the book. Tell us about what you want us to be thinking about. And I'll provide I'm going to offer some warnings for anybody who came in that was came in possibly from my audience who's not ready. And I just, give them a little heads up, So but why don't you just set the stage for us, Dana? Tell us what's your pick for the next month?
So FYI, whenever she's trying to set the stage and have all these caveats, that just lets you know that the book is about to be on fire. Okay, listen, Linda, listen. Okay, so the book is Twisted Love by Anna Wang, and I am a huge Anna Wang fan. I absolutely love that her multicultural romances feature non-traditional protagonists, usually. And I haven't read a ton of her books, so I'm going to keep it 100. But they almost always feature at least one Asian American protagonist. And I like how she touches on things of cultural things, what it's like to be like a first generation, second generation, third generation American. And I think it just has a very interesting sort of perspective on her romance. But it does also have this edge that I think is a little bit different, not just because it can be classified as dark romance, but another part of the element is usually, well, the ones that I've read, there usually is some sort of like wealth, status sort of environment to it as well, versus a lot of romance that have a billionaire may have things like a Cinderella trope where the female protagonist may not be as well off as the male protagonist. And a number of her stories really don't have that sort of power disparity. Usually it's tied up to either culture for the stories that I've read. And again, I feel like it just gives a good insight into just another culture that's wrapped in, if you will, the American experience. Yeah. Now, because of that, it also is also a dark romance. And I think the biggest sort of caveat will be, for me, whenever I'm working with clients, I categorize dark romances a little bit different. I don't just look at them all as one like lump, like a monolith. I look at them as being, there are different ways that you can approach a dark romance, and sort of making that decision also can affect what your landscape is like as a writer in that world. And the landscape is usually, for me, that it's a dark romance because of the sort of emotional pull on it that may be wrapped up in like the history, their upbringing, things that may have been traumatic. And maybe someone, parents killed each other. Maybe the parents died. Sometimes it can be wrapped up in another layer of dark romance, which could be organized crime, the mafia, things like that. And then the third one can be things that sort of tackle on taboo, kink, that may push it even further. And you may have some dark romances that have a little bit of all of it. And I find that one of the things that I've come to enjoy about dark romance that can be like a hidden gem is that you get this opportunity to explore the spectrum of the human emotions, right? It's not people where, they pretty much maybe they had a hard life, but it really wasn't that bad, but it just wasn't good. But their heart got broken, and now they're trying to get over that heartbreak with this new love. And there's nothing wrong with it. We love a good contemporary romance or a good rom-com. But this is usually where there's usually something deeper, and it's something that really has affected the perspective of everything else. Everything else in their life after that moment ceased to be the same. And the way they made meaning of that moment determines everything. And that is what Twisted Love is about. It's really about, something happened very traumatic to, I think his name is Alex, the protagonist. And he makes a promise. And you see that he has a long range goal of how he is going to extract his revenge, and it is not taken lightly. He goes to the full extent of what he can do. And one of the reasons why I picked this book, one, because I love Anna Wang, and I mean, it gives me a reason to read her. But two, I feel like it's a great sort of contrast to the other dark romance that we did in doing Beautifully Cruel. Because I feel like with that one was sort of like, we kind of can classify as mafia light-ish, you know what I mean? Yeah. And this one, it is a dark romance, and it's because there's a lot of more, if you will, violence, but it's not all sort of more in the present, but it really was in the past. And so with that said, this is why I recommended it. I know that Rachel was probably on the ride for her life and did not realize it, but I did try to warn her. And I will say, if you're a person that you're someone that doesn't really like dark romance, be aware that it is a dark romance. Listen, if it's too much for the steamy scenes, you could just skim read them and sort of move on a little bit, but it does contribute to the story. And I think it is a great example of what it's like as a writer in a story to go there. As someone, when I write, that is one of my greatest issues, and I'm always aware, because I do not want them to hurt that bad. I want them to hit the plot point, but it doesn't have to be that bad,
Trying to keep those emotional punches from being too deep and gut wrenching.
Because I'll be the one writing and crying, and so. But in this story, it is one of those moments where you realize the power of a good rug pull, the power of a good breakup scene, like it goes there where you really have to, you can see on the page, and she just does it just right so that it will gut you. If it doesn't, something is wrong with you. I mean, it's not my business, but something is wrong with you. Okay. So you get all the chandelier swinging, the tension, the enemies to lovers sort of vibes, and while at the same time seeing two characters deal with things that honestly had nothing to do with them, but changed everything. Mm-hmm. It changed everything. And to me, I think it sort of can give a sort of, I don't want to say meaning, but it gives a sort of nod to people where, listen, my life has not been peaches and cream, right? I've had some stuff, I've experienced some stuff, but you can see that there's a possibility for healing even when the worst things have happened to you, and that life has required you be this person, this tough person, when underneath you, that's not really you, but it's who circumstances have required you to be. And so I think it's a different take. Y'all, I low-key may make it feel like it's a lot softer than it is in my explanation. But this is what I get from it as a writer and as an editor. And I find that if you're a person like me, that you write stories and sometimes you struggle with going there, like you're not allowing them to experience the high highs and the low lows like they really should, so that the plot and the transformation truly shines through. Sometimes you need one that goes so far that you're like, whoa, like, yo, your heart will break. I was talking to the book. I was so mad. I was mad at him. I was mad at her. Everybody that wanted it, you can get it. That's how I felt. Okay. And every time I read it, I felt the same way. But I think it's an amazing example. And it's honestly, at the end of the day, a story of, how you hear that saying, like, hurt people hurt people. Mm-hmm. And in romance, at the end of the day, it's not to leave them in that hurt place, right? That love truly can be healing, but it doesn't always go the way we want it to go. And I think that's one of the benefits of like dark romance. That's probably this underbelly of, unlike contemporary romance or rom-com, you sort of get the part of romance that's fairy tale-ish. And this one is like gritty, raw, and you know what? If you want it, you're going to have to work for it. Yeah. And so you have a great like demonstration of grumpy sunshine. You have a great demonstration of tropes like brother's best friend, secrets.
That's a trope.
Which one?
Brother's best friend. I didn't know that was a specific trope.
Yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm. I was excited about because
or even best friend sister, right? Because it's an off limits romance technically, because it's off limits. You're not supposed to, right? Especially in this case, it's off limits because it's like you're not supposed. He's asking you to protect her. Yeah. So sorry, go ahead. Oh yeah. So yes, so those all the things. Yeah, I'm trying to catch it because I know it's a little bit, it's a little bit ratchet. I don't know another term for it, but it is one of my favorites. It's one of my favorite annoying books. And I think there's going to be a lot to be said about not just the emotional journey, but how when we talk about plot, when we talk about characters, again, I think it's a good one to look at, especially after having something like Beautifully Cruel. And I think it also makes it so that as we move into closing out our final books of 2025, that we have had the spectrum. Yeah. I think the only one that we didn't do is
with things we never got over, and ending with something like, I mean,
Twisted Love.
Whoop. Not even on purpose.
Like, let Dana bring it in. I think the only thing we didn't do is maybe a sweet romance. But Lucy's score is kind of, I mean, it gets steamy, but I mean, it's pretty, not wholesome, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. And I think it gives us a nice sort of foundation for our first year of Story Deep Dive. So, did I cover everything?
Yeah, you sure did. You honestly, yeah, I was gonna say, you know, if you're listening and you're not accustomed to romance in particular, right? Like this is one of those ones that I don't want to say don't read it, but I would say like listen to the episodes, because I'm not gonna be like don't listen to episodes of the podcast that I'm on. But maybe if you're curious, I would start somewhere else. I wouldn't start someone who's not read romance before here. In particular, if you're not comfortable with steamy scenes, this story does get into, like, it does incorporate kink, which even, like, I've read steamy romances before, and I was uncomfortable. Like, I sat and I was like, oh, I just have to, like, sit through. Okay, this is happening. All right, we just gotta get through. Like, you know, so I say that for anybody who's, like, hearing it, and they're like, oh, cool, like, gritty? All right. Like, interested, emotional? All right. And I'm just like, let me just give you a... So that nobody opens the book and they're reading and they're like, what? Because that's a little bit, it was a little bit me. So I would say that, again, I'm thinking mostly of, like, people who came to the podcast from my audience who don't even normally read romances, like, at all.
Well, I have a lot of clients that don't read dark, but I will say this one has all three layers of what I've talked about in some capacity. So there's emotional, the darkness, or in the sense of emotional elements that may be, it could be triggering, but has some sort of trauma, on both sides. You also have the dark from a sense of a little bit of, like, a little sampling of sort of organized crime, slash mafia sort of ish. Not a whole lot, but it's enough. And you also have taboo kink. So you have it in the way that they express that in their intimacy. Y'all, I say this in a very nice, clean, and wholesome way because we're on a recorded line, but it's going to go there, okay? It's going to go there. I mean, I have to talk about this kind of stuff and just be ready that it is going to go there. And so you get all three. However, I will say, I think all of it makes the whole entire story worth it. It builds towards a sense of emotional rawness and exposure that this story requires, and it goes there. So if you're not, listen, we understand. If you got to be like my mom used to do when we were kids, when they were kids, she'd tell us cover our eyes. You might have to cover your eyes on a couple of parts, a couple of 3, 4, 5 parts.
Did just use of the skip 30 seconds ahead button.
Be like, oh, they're still going. Okay.
yes. Right. Almost guaranteed. It's like you could probably just skip to the next chapter and then we'll be through. We'll be safe.
So yes, I'll try to do better next year. But I think that this is, again, another one of those things of, like, when you are pushing and you are going there and you are challenging yourself to really be authentic to the story that is real for those characters. Because even in that, you know, the story that unfolds is real to those characters. And I think that's one of the greatest parts of storytelling. And it can be one of those things that not just allow you to create the authentic story for the characters, but it also stretches you as a writer.
All right. Are we ready to launch into The Woman in the Library?
We are. And so, wait, before we go transition, this means, you know, if you have time to grab the book, as always, our books, we try to make sure that they are available in multiple formats. And so you won't see it in the show notes for this episode other than a quick mention. But it is available wherever books are sold. This is one of those books you will find, because, baby, Barnes & Noble's be having this thing on lock. Her books, people love her books. So you probably could even find it at your local bookstore. And then we'll have more as we move forward into this story and begin to round out our 2025 reading list. And so with that said, we're going to go ahead and get ready, Rachel. Okay. All
right.
Let me see.
Tag me in, coach. Tag me in. Come on.
She had too much coffee, y'all. As we get ready now to transition into our editor's takes for The Woman in the Library by
Sulari Gentill.
She
ready.
She too fast, y'all. She about to be fired on her day off. Okay. And so, and before we get into it and talk about our, like, some of the high points, this has been such a meaty book. I think this was an amazing choice. I mean, you always have great choices, but I think this has been an amazing choice. And we sort of talked a little bit more about that and just this author in particular offline, but this has been a great choice. And as we get into this, go ahead and give us our summary before we get to our final takes on The Woman in the Library.
Yes, ma'am. I'm on it. All right. In The Woman in the Library, four strangers are united by a single moment, a single scream, while sitting next to each other in the Boston Public Library. What follows is an amateur sleuth investigation among four friends: tatted psychology student Marigold, Harvard law kid Whit, dashing author Kane, and our protagonist Freddie, a writer on fellowship working on her debut novel. But as this new friendship unfolds, so too do secrets. The biggest one of them might just be a killer.
So, Rachel, as we get into this last episode for your pick, what are the couple of things that you would like for us to sort of circle back to and touch on during this episode?
Yeah, so I'm looking at kind of two very high level things. We talked about a lot of stuff over the last 2 weeks of episodes, like with our plot and character. But two of the high level ones I kind of want to just touch on again is about using secrets or withheld information in crime stories. But this is something that applies to really any story. And then how character interrelationships affect the way characters present on the page, and how you sort of how you showcase your characters through those interrelationships and behaviors, as well as how they approach problem solving, and using that, really like letting the plot fuel those opportunities for your characters really expressing on the page. What about you?
The couple of things that I want to touch on, and I feel like we've talked about them, but not as much. And I'm really looking forward to us talking about it and getting your take on it, especially for authors that are interested in writing this kind of a story. And the first one is like selecting your container. And I'm calling it a container. And we know that this is sort of a book about a book. And the way she sort of had these parallel sort of stories running from the storyline for Hannah, who is the one writing the book, and Freddie, who is the character in the story. And so selecting your container, and what are maybe some tips and things that we can learn, because I thought I really enjoyed it. And it was a nice little mix up, and she just did a really great job of sort of keeping that consistency there. So I loved that. And then also, I wrote it down as unexpected but inevitable. Like, how do you innovate in a sense of, innovating in your space while giving people what they want? I think how she did this, I'd never seen it before. Again, I do have the caveat that this was my first time reading a story like this. It won't be my last. I'm going to be looking for others because I think it is very interesting. But it makes me think about, like, how do you take something that does have this sort of kind of a long-standing understanding of what readers are getting and sort of make it your own. And we're talking about it in this space, but I'm sure it'll be applicable to any other spaces when it comes to writing. And so those are the couple things that I want to talk about. So let's go ahead and dive into your first one, which I had it written different than you did. So I'm going to let you say it again. I put secrets and hidden agendas, but I think you said it different.
Yeah, that's like almost exactly the same. I said secrets and withheld information.
Okay,
so
there we go.
Right on the same. So, I think one of the things to sort of recognize about crime stories is that your currency in a crime story is information. Information is the thing that your readers are interested in. However, that information has to be interesting, right? So you have to do that pair of, this is a puzzle at its heart. Your regular, I talked about in the preview episode, the spectrum of crime stories. A crime story will be like this, but a murder mystery, that goes like probably double, triple for a murder mystery, because crime has other elements that can kind of keep it going and maintain that interest. Although in a traditional crime novel, the rule still applies that information is your currency. But if you're going for like a full, like, puzzle oriented murder mystery, information is your primary currency. And so you're looking at that info. So yes, we want information, but it has to be interesting information. And so one of the ways that you do this is through what information characters are holding back. And you want like the majority of your witnesses and your suspects to be holding back some measure of information. Because if everybody just told everything outright and was just like, here's everything that I know, no lies, full truth, ta-da. Like, first of all, your protagonist is going to be like, cool, that's everything I need to know. And we have no reason to go see that character again, which also means we have no reason to be interested in that character. Because it's like, well, we know everything, so sayonara, see you later. And so having characters, like multiple characters who aren't even your killer, withholding information is key to the gradual unveiling of the truth of the case. And it also gives you a means to add interest and intrigue to those actual characters. So we become more interested in characters as we learn more information about them a little bit at a time. So we talk to a suspect and they tell us one layer of information. And then we go through the investigation and we learn something that seems to contradict what they told us. And when we come back around and our protagonist confronts them with that information, right, that creates narrative drive, because we're like, oh, these two things don't add up. We're going to go talk to this person again. I wonder what they're going to say. And then we're going to watch them maneuver around that, or the truth is going to come out, whatever that thing is. And so, you know, a lot of times when we think of crime stories, we think of clues and we think of like physical evidence. We've got a footprint outside the window and we've got, you know, a lipstick stain over here. And those are clues, and we do like those. Those are great to have in the mix. But one of your best, like some of your best ammunition is going to be information, secrets, withheld, because it's what it does is it creates these mini mysteries surrounding every individual character. So now every character is a little bit of a mystery that we want to unravel, and that gives you that momentum throughout the story as we're unpacking individual characters and finding out more about their relationships and more about, you know, what are they hiding? Why are they hiding it? You know, why did they act that way, right? And it's giving us that those little little loops that open up that we want to close and we want to investigate more, and that's really what gives you that drive. And this applies, right, for like any story, things that people are withholding, things that they don't want to talk about, things that they are, or, you know, interrelationships with other characters that they're, you know, maybe not wanting to, that they're not admitting what the nature of that relationship is, or why they have beef. I think about, Sloane and Lucian, right, from Lucy's Score series, right? And we see them and they're always at each other's throats, but we have no idea why. And we're like, what the heck is their deal? And all the other characters are like, what the heck is their deal? And then we get that unraveled throughout when we get to see their book. And so this is something that can really apply across genres, because it's basically setting up little mysteries surrounding individual characters, and it makes us want to know more about those characters. But in a crime story, it's essential. You almost can't have a crime story without that kind of interest and without that particular aspect.
Mm-hmm. What I like about having that present in this story is the fact that it made it so that as clues were, or aspects of the story were unfolding around the death of the first character. I can't remember her name right now, but Caroline, thank you. You didn't know what was relevant or just getting to know someone. Mm-hmm. And so it all became relevant because you didn't know. So you're sort of really paying attention because everybody looks suspect. But the point is, yes. And bringing up when we read Things We Never Got Over, I think that is a great example of how you can use that. And we use it all the time when we think of series creation, especially when they're interconnected series. It's how you get people to read through to the end, is by having those little pocket of mysteries about the individual character in their own regard that in reality affects the entire series or dynamic between the characters. And so you kind of hinted at this, which knocks on that, which a part of this is sort of becomes to unfold through the character interactions, that we begin to see more, not just of what they're withholding or what they're choosing to divulge, whether it is an opportunity or it is manipulation or opportunistic, right? But we also see how them getting closer or further apart, or their pursuit of relationship, or their pursuit of, sometimes it's just of closeness, that we are seeing a lot about them, how they process what becomes pivotal to them. And you're also getting into that nuanced and character development that we talked about in last week's episode, just by them interacting with each other and reacting interacting or reacting to what's going on. Because all of them are in this sort of pressure cooker that's getting a little bit more intense, and it keeps going. And so, tell us a little bit more about that, because I think that is really crucial. And we see it here. I think this is a great example of it because it's so nicely done and it's consistent across the book. But this is something that can be used in any book.
Oh, yeah. You know, I think, and that's the beauty of, like, this is going to sound so silly, but this is the beauty of a plot, right? Plot is driven by conflict, but everybody handles conflict differently, right? So, like, the way that you would handle a conflict, Dana, is wildly different than the way I would handle a conflict. And we watch it play out, you know, when we just talk of, like, this is how I tried to solve that problem. And you're like, why would you do that? That's crazy, right? Like, we've had these conversations many times. And that's where you kind of get to see the shape of a person's personality, right? So, like, I'm a super people pleaser. So you're going to see that come out in the ways that I attempt to solve problems. And that's the beauty of plots as being full of conflict, so that the characters that are embroiled in that conflict are responding to it in different ways. And so it's giving you the opportunity to showcase, who are they? When they are presented with this information, what is their first reaction? Do they reach for suspicion? Do they reach to explain it away? Do they want to ask more questions? Right? Like, and since because of the way that the plot has been styled, that it's four friends and they're getting to know each other, so they're spending kind of a lot of time together, and they're in this sort of like subset of Boston anyway, so they kind of run into each other as well. It means that when new case information crops up, or when something happens related to the case, we get to see each of their reactions and understand more about who they are, or the way that they interact with each other, right? Like, there's moments when Freddie is sort of like, you know, I'm expecting Whit to be sort of rude here, but actually he surprises me and he's very gentle. Or, like, right, you get these different moments where we get to see the broad strokes of the character, and then we get to see the little nuances in the way that they treat each other and the way that they think through things. And, like, right, like Marigold is like one of our first characters to be like, dang it, like, we heard somebody scream, that was a cry for help, someone should help. Like, you know, she's like the first person to like get in there. And that tells us something, right, about who Marigold is. And we see Freddie, who's someone who's a little bit more, so she's a little bit older than Whit and Marigold, and she tries to take a more measured approach. She's like, well, you know, there are professionals who are supposed to be doing that. You know, she's kind of trying to bring the balance to Marigold's kind of intensity, you know. And so it's letting us, and so then, but we also get to see then how they handle each other, right? When they lose their temper, and how they respond, and, you know, when they move toward forgiveness, or when, you know, Freddie has to say, okay, maybe Marigold's right, or, you know, something like that. We get to see that. And so when you have, and that's why conflict is so important for your plot. I don't care if we're low stakes, I don't care if we're high stakes, like, conflict is so central to any story, because that's where you get to show who people are. And it's also how you get to show how they change, how they handle problems differently over the course of a story. And that's where you can, again, give nuance or show transformation in characters. And this story does that so well by like you said, creating this pressure cooker where they are together, and they're together often in something that sort of they all experience together. It was this sort of moment of bonding because they had this really bizarre experience and they were all happened to be at the same table at that exact moment.
Mm-hmm. And it does a great job too of having sort of this ripple effect, because, you know, having forced proximity always helps with these types of situations, because you see it as like how it ripples through them, and you see their natural response to it, right? Yeah. Versus a sort of curated response that can be done at a distance or through a phone or what have you. And so I think that is a really great point. This sort of makes me think about kind of taking it a little bit broader. But before we go, is there anything else you want to bring back in? I feel like this story is about the murder mystery, but it's like characters.
Yeah.
Right. Cast. So is there anything else you want to say about this before we move to my more broader topics that I wanted to touch on?
The last thing that I would just add is if you are writing a story, and actually any story, this isn't just specific to crime, but just a couple of questions that I would maybe ask yourself. So first of all, take the time to think through your major characters, like think about your major cast, sort of collect them on a page and be like, okay, who's my primary cast? And then ask yourself, how do they uniquely approach the problems they're presented with in the story? Or how would they handle the story if they were the protagonist? So sometimes kind of shifting your perspective to say, oh, if this person was the protagonist, what would the story look like? And it tells you not just a whole bunch about that character, but it can also end up telling you quite a lot about your protagonist as well, because you're seeing the difference, right? It's like helping you sort of establish, oh, my protagonist is this kind of person, because this is how they kind of move through the story. And so that exercise in contrast can sometimes help you find those, again, there's just sort of like sharper lines around your individual characters. So I just wanted to kind of drop those couple of questions in there as kind of an exercise that you can do if this is something you're wanting to work on or develop in your story.
Yeah, and I bet you're going to find also in doing an exercise like that, like the energy that those characters bring to the story and ensuring that you have that balance there. I think Freddie brings a very, between her age and her approach, it has this sort of level-headedness that I'm going to assess the details and then respond. Like there's not a lot of knee-jerk responses to her, and that helps in this environment. I think it also made for an interesting read in how the author sort of paced it out, because it didn't have to mean like how sometimes we have in romance where you have these huge hooks at the end because you want to keep pulling people to the next page, but it was just enough to keep you on the hook. Yeah. Right? It wasn't like an immediate like page turner. Like I could read the story over time and still enjoy each chapter as I went along. But I think it's because it had kept me on the hook and kept me interested. But it wasn't this thing like, oh my God, I'm gonna stay up all night reading this book. Yeah. Not that kind of energy. Not for me, it wasn't. But overall, I thought it was amazing. Okay, so a couple of the broader questions that I wanted to look at, or comments that I wanted us to discuss when it concerns this story, is selecting a container. In this book, I'm glad that you read it from the cover, like, you know, a book about a book, but we see that we have the storyline of Hannah, who's writing the story, and Freddie, who is the main character in the story, and we're watching sort of pacing between narrative and sort of letters as this story unfolds. And I just thought that that was a very interesting take. I love the fact that it was consistently applied. I liked and appreciated the fact that it gave information to me who this was a new sort of read for me, of like, it gave me enough information to wrap my brain around, okay, this is what's happening. Like I've read enough to kind of get what's going on. Yeah. And I thought what it did is it sort of was a kind of a way of, I don't want to say like dangling a carrot, but it was sort of like it pulled you further and further into the story, because there were times when I found that the big container of Hannah's predicament in the story sort of made me really curious about where she was going to go on the Freddie level and vice versa. And so I really enjoyed that. And at first, because I was listening to the audiobook, I was like, wait, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Like I was a little bit confused. And so it wasn't until I got the book that I was like, oh, okay, and look at it on the page and see what was going on. So I think the question of selecting the container here did a lot for this. I think it did a lot just in how she presented the story. I think it also made it so that it allowed the story between the main characters to be the evolution of the friendship while still trying to find Carolyn's find out what happened to her and who was responsible. And so it felt as if we were just watching friends sort of wrestle through this versus it being like, who did it? And there are moments when it's like, we got to find this, and they sort of rally together. But it felt like a softer approach is maybe how I would say. And so I would like to hear your sort of thoughts on that sort of container selection, and how it applies here. And maybe we could even consider like, what are some things a writer may want to consider if you want to be a little more creative, if you will, as far as how you present the story.
Yeah. So just to make sure I'm understanding like the question, when you sort of define container, are you talking like framing narrative, or are you talking more like thematic concept guiding the story? Like, can you define container for me?
Framework. Yeah, not the themes and concepts. I'm talking about like the decision, the framework. So the decision to say, okay, I'm going to sort of have this as a story in a story. I am going to base this on and how she's using the Freddie's level of story and how she's using Hannah's level of story. And I think a lot of the other things like themes and all that were pretty consistent. It's just about how she sort of breadcrumbed them out in the story. And it may not be an exact answer. It may be that this was just very unique to her, but I just thought it contributed a lot to my reading experience.
Yeah. Well, and I think, like, and of course I haven't heard any interviews with her where she necessarily talks about how she created this book necessarily. But, if you're interested in doing something sort of like almost like out of the pocket, trying to do something a little bit original with your story, to know that it might take a couple of drafts to find that thing.
Yes.
So I can kind of imagine, and again, I could be completely and utterly wrong. There's, two ways I can sort of imagine this happening broadly. Is like, first, maybe she had the idea of like, oh, what if I wrote a story where the author was actively writing it and getting feedback as she was writing it, right? Like, and that it became this sort of like what if scenario. Alternatively, it's possible that what she started with was just a regular murder mystery, and then as she was writing, got this idea of like, oh, how could I do this and this would be really cool, right? And so if you have like a wicked cool idea that for a framing device, number one, I would say on the whole, go for it. But also number two, know that it's going to take a couple of drafts to get it into to get the story working with it. So as in, don't expect like your first draft, right, to be like, yes, here's my framing story and it's working and they're paced evenly and the thing is, because again, even the first draft of your A storyline is like probably not going to be quite there either. But I also think like using I'm trying to figure out how to say this, because I think you can draw inspiration for framing, like if framing narratives are something you're interested in, I would say go looking for stories that use a framing narrative and like find out, like, again, if you don't already have a pre-existing idea, or if you do, watch how someone executed it, right? But like find out like what types of framing narratives are interesting to me and what kinds of experiences do I enjoy when it's sort of set inside of a framing story, and how can I tie in my framing story to the story idea that I have? Or if you have the idea for the framing story, what story could emerge out of this? And possibly also just know that you're setting yourself up for an extra step, right? An extra task. Because essentially at that point, you're going to be managing another plot line.
That's right.
So you're going to have your regular plot line and then any subplots that go inside of that. And then you're going to have a plot for your container story. and it's going to have to pace with your regular plot. And so just, I think knowing that going in as well is just like one of those things of like, okay, you're managing an extra plot line. So to set the expectations for yourself and to do right by your reader, you're looking to ensure that that framing story moves as though it were an embedded plot line in your normal story, as in, as the story escalates, your framing story escalates, as it, de-escalates or whatever, as it gets worse or whatever, that, you're making sure that those are following along so that they are evenly paced with each other and they're mutually contributing to that narrative drive. I don't know if that quite answers the actual question that you had, but those are like some things that I'm sort of, that I would be considering. And the other thing I think would be, just if you're thinking about innovating in, in a genre like this, right, that has established expectations, and that is like, okay, we have like a very specific, so first, before you start playing with that kind of stuff, make sure you understand the genre at its core, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's sort of like what you talk about when people who don't read or particularly like romance are like, I'm gonna get in there and I'm gonna, change romance, I'm gonna do this thing, and you're like, you don't even know what romance, like, you don't even know what belongs in a romance, how are you gonna, change it when you don't even know what's in it? And it's the same thing, right? Of like you want to understand that genre at a deep, deep level, because that's really where, like, that's what's going to give you the fuel for, okay, how could I turn this on its head? What would make this a little more interesting, or what would make this a little more challenging? What's going to make this a little more challenging for me to write, right? What if I wrote from this point of view? What happens to the story? Can you still maintain the mystery if you have, the killer's point of view in there? And that sort of, killer's point of view is not that uncommon, but I've seen it done in ways that are like, oh, I've read the point of view from a character who killed someone, and I don't know who it is, like, and it's like multi-POV kind of thing. So those are kind of some of the things that I'd be considering. But if you have follow-up questions, I can, because that's not maybe super satisfactory.
You blended the two, so I'm going to back up one little pace. I would say the other part that I would talk about when we consider the framing or the framework is understanding like what each one of those moments, what they contribute and what they represent in the story. Right? Because what you're starting to do is really create this sort of crumb trail. And especially if you have it so that the understanding and the understanding and the sort of revelations and things that are evolved through the framework level of the story sort of gives another sort of insight or understanding of the part of the story that it's containing. It sort of makes us lean in as a reader. And so I totally agree that, you are adding another layer here, and it's almost that those layers feel as if they're running parallel, but the secret sauce is when they're not, right? It's sort of like a host and I don't know a lot about science, so I'm not going to go too far with this example, but like a host, like a leech grabs on to, like they're tied together, and there are taking and giving, and there's this sort of symbiotic relationship, and when you're able to do that, and it sort of provides insight, and it makes you think as a reader like, which she did really well, and I'm low key. The way she did, I was getting more and more creeped out. And that's when I started noticing it more and more. And so I think that folds into the innovation. But I think more than anything, before going into the innovation, which was the second part of the thing I wanted to talk about, it makes it so storytelling can really become this sort of mental gymnastics for you as the writer, and you get to have fun while they get to have fun reading it. And it's sort of like what does this contribute? What does this provide that is necessary for the person to get the fullness of what I've envisioned for this story? And I think that just makes for just a yummy playground to play in. It just does. And sometimes it may be that other people get it just enough to, to enjoy the story, but they don't get it the way you get it. And that's okay, because it may be just for you to fully get. But if you can make it so that there's sort of this passing through and sort of like going up and going down between the stories as if it's writing both of those sort of lines, I think you have something really, really special. And I don't think all stories can hold it the way that this one did. But I thought that it made this experience very unique and memorable. So I thought that was really good. But I think it could also set you up for having moments that confuse people, that people don't understand. And I would say, like, take it and be very aware of that, you know, and I would definitely agree that you would have several passes to be able to truly pull it off, because at some point, you know, every story, when you have something like this, they merge. And it should be that merging was inevitable, but in the beginning, you just see it as these sort of parallel sort of verses that are existing that begin to sort of merge to each other the more that the stakes increase. So that was that on the container. The thing about innovation that I had in my notes, which was like, you know, having something that makes it unexpected but inevitable. Like at the end of the day, this was the fair play mystery. This was a murder mystery. We had clues, we had revelations, we had red herrings, we had secrets, but, right, like she put a little bit of sauce on it. You know what I mean? And it makes me think about, you know, having a story that you feel like, oh, like every story won't be like this story. But I think challenging yourself to have a story like this, and that it sort of contributes something interesting and different to the landscape. It challenges you as a writer. It challenges the characters in the story that you've created, whether it can support what you want to do. And lastly, I think it makes for just great storytelling, right? It just makes for really good storytelling, so that you're giving people what they want, but you're also saying, like, sprinkling a little extra on there. Exactly. It's like, I'm gonna give you what you want and then some. And so I think that is one of the things that this story did well, and I truly enjoyed it. Now, one of the questions that I had that I listed, and I feel like we should start having this question more often, but I was thinking about it because this was such a unique story. And my question for you is, who would you recommend this book to?
Yeah. Hands down, if you are writing a murder mystery, this is a great one to read. In particular, so, you know, I love my dusty books. I love my classics. I love an Agatha Christie. I love Dorothy L. Sayers. But, you know, if you're wanting to, and I think those are great for understanding the genre and like seeing the genre in, you know, and they're detective novels as we even know them now. So it's not like this is almost a detective novel and here's, you know, it was on the way to the detective novel, but isn't, you know, the kind of thing. Those are going to be great books to read. But if you're also looking for the murder mystery in a modern landscape, right? Like this was published, I think in 2020, maybe 2021. I can't find it's like not right in the front like it usually is. There's like a whole bunch of praise for the book, which, you know, I mean, good for you. It deserves it, but I can't find the daggone date.
The copyright.
2022. So it's very recent. And so if you're looking for a very, you know, modern murder mystery, and that's something you are trying to do, like far and away, this is one to read. I also actually just recently recommended it to a student who is writing a mystery and who's kind of trying to decide whether they want to write in past tense or present tense. So they kind of wrote in past tense because that's what they're the most familiar with. It's really the most common. Mystery is like the most common way to write is in past tense. But they were sort of like curious about present tense, and they kind of liked the immediacy of present tense, but were unsure of sort of how to handle some of the logistical aspects of writing in direct present tense. And this one does it so well, right? Because like she's writing in first person present tense, but it doesn't mean that she's narrating every single second of every single day. Yeah. So we have these moments where, you know, she's like, you know, I write in a fury for 3 hours, or that kind of thing, where time is still passing. And so you're not sort of responsible for writing out every second, but seeing where she sort of like gives us that summary and where it's expanded out. And so if you're looking to write a mystery and you're considering present tense, or you're curious about it, but are wondering about how to handle the logistical side, this is a great one because she handles it really well. And the first person present narration feels very seamless. So I think those would be like my top two of like if you're writing a murder mystery right now, I think even if you're writing a crime novel, this one is good for for the clues and the characters and the relationships. But I would especially recommend it for someone who's really aiming at murder mystery specifically.
Yeah, and the amateur sleuth too.
Yes.
This is a good one for that.
Yeah.
Especially because, I mean, the other one, when we did, she had magical abilities. I mean, she was an amateur sleuth, and then the other ones, I mean, I like ones that they do have another sort of skill set, but this wasn't in alignment with crime in any way as far as the skill set. I thought that's great. Okay, well, is there anything else that you feel like we did not cover when it comes to this story that you do not want potential readers or writers to miss out on before we close out this episode?
I don't think so. I just want to, celebrate what a great book this is. And if you haven't read it already, I just highly, highly recommend it. Again, especially if you love books about books, like books about reading and writing, and you love that kind of a book that takes place inside of the world of books. This one is it's so fun. I read it last year on a short trip that we took during the summer, and it was an excellent summer read. But even as we're in October and the cold months, because it's it's the Northeast and it's winter, I love it for a fall or winter pick as well. So it's just I enjoy getting to reread this and talk about it so much. So yay. Thank you, Sulari Gentill, for being amazing.
And I would say, I think I like, as someone who absolutely loves the genre that I like I know where I read, I know where my bag is. I know that, you know it if you've been here, you know it too, right? But I like seeing how certain elements play out in other genres. And I think this was a great moment of that. The character interactions, the way that information was revealed, the usage of the balancing of the characters in between their backstories as well as their current example. And we really can't talk about it a lot without giving some really vital information away. So having that, I mean, it is prime sort of groundwork for building a kick-ass, pardon my French, series, right? Yeah. Because that's what you're always doing, is balancing those interests and seeding characters in advance so that readers are interested in them before their books even come. And so I think that was a great thing. And just for me to have those other elements that just made it fascinating, and the other elements that had me questioning, thank goodness for Leo for filling in a couple of gaps as we went along. But I like it when I can go to another genre and it helps my brain to just start percolating on ways that I can bring different elements into my world. And so this, I think, was a great story for that. Without being a heavy read, it wasn't, I wouldn't consider it a fast read, but it's not a slow read. I think this would be one of those stories that is great for a physical book that you have on your nightstand and you read a little bit and you enjoy it as you go. I think this is a great book for airplane reading and travel reading. Yeah, right. So I just feel like it is a good one. Like, if you ever found a good book when you're at the airport and you're like, oh, I'm so glad I picked it up. This is one of those kind of books to me. And it's memorable. And so, I would say just totally have fun. And if it's something outside of your scope, I think it's really good. I think it can be great for someone that's doing cozy. Right.
Yes. It's right on that line. And so I even, as someone who's writing a murder mystery, but it's not gritty crime, and it's even the mystery part is secondary. I have looked to this book of okay, how are we incorporating it and escalating it and keeping it moving without it sort of turning into Hercule Poirot with the magnifying glass and, following the clues like that,
Yeah, and what it makes me think of when I think about cozy, I think about the fact that you are intentionally creating a world and an environment, but the way you handle those secondary characters or the incidental characters in that town or that environment is much like what she did with the characters here. They may or may not be connected. And a lot of times the suspect pool is a little bit broader because your protagonist is new to the environment. And so it sort of serves the same way with Freddie, where it's like a different environment, new people, versus it being because all of them were sort of on the same level as far as being students. And so I feel like there's so many different gems that can be pulled away while at the same time reading a great story. So yeah, with that said, y'all, I think we can officially, like, if we had a gavel, you know, we could wash our hands of it. We can ring the alarm if you Beyonce, you know what I'm saying? And we've also announced our next book, which is Twisted Love by Anna Wang, which we will start in our next episode with the overview. Thank you, as always, for being a part of this experience. If you haven't done so already, visit us online at storydeepdive.com. You can leave us a review, subscribe, do all the things, ask questions, and of course, share it with your reading and writing friends. We would absolutely love that. And we will be seeing you all really, really soon. Take care. And as always, happy writing. Goodbye.